So the 2023-24 Edmonton Oilers season has continued. It's continued to be a fun one. You know, we did start, it looked like it was going to be a season where we were going to see some ups and downs. Or rather, more along the lines of we were going to see some downs. And maybe if we were lucky, we were going to see some ups. And for a while, it kind of looked like we were going to see some ups, some downs, then some ups, and then some downs again, and then God knows what. But since then, we have seen ups and ups and ups. And even when it kind of looks like we're looking at a bit of a down, we're still looking pretty up, and that's a fun season to be involved in. You know, that's a fun season to watch. But today, I kind of want to take a little bit of time, and I want to talk about somebody who I still think at this juncture is a bit of an unsung hero of this season, and somebody that apparently has been incredibly underappreciated now for what must be at least several years. You know, of course, I'm talking about the current Edmonton Oilers backup goaltender, Calvin Pickard. I think that when he got called up, people were not really expecting very much from Calvin Pickard. I mean, ask yourself that. You know, when they sent Jack Campbell down to the AHL, you know, on what was kind of, we all hoped was going to be just like a conditioning / recovery assignment, and they brought up Calvin Pickard, you weren't really expecting very much out of him, were you? Because I'm going to be honest with you, I wasn't. I wasn't expecting very much out of Calvin Pickard at all. But you know what? I got to admit, I was wrong. Like, I was really wrong. I mean, look at the way that he's performed. I mean, he has had a couple of games where arguably maybe he hasn't been the best. One or two. But I think that we weren't expecting that. We were expecting him to be, you know, just a guy that was going to come up here and be a placeholder until Jack Campbell, rather I should say, was ready to come back from his conditioning / recovery stint in the AHL. And that is something that very much could have happened. Because when you look at Jack Campbell's numbers, you know, since being in the AHL, I mean, yes, he struggled a little bit when he went down. And then he got better. And then he struggled again for a little while. But since then, he's been extremely solid in the AHL. You know, he very much is looking like, you know, a $5 million NHL goaltender in the AHL who should be waiting for his chance to come back. But there's just one little problem with that, and that is that Calvin Pickard has been too goddamn good since he came up that we can't risk sending him back down because then some other team comes along and they snap him off waivers. Because Calvin Pickard has to clear waivers before he could go back down to the Bakersfield Condors. That's a really bad break for Jack Campbell. Because my opinion on Jack Campbell really hasn't changed. I do think that Jack Campbell is going to be back in the NHL. I think he's going to be a starting goaltender somewhere. As a matter of fact, I mean, let's just be honest with you. It looks like Philadelphia is in, you know, dire need of a replacement starter goaltender, and we all know why, sadly. But Jack Campbell could be that guy for them. I no longer really see him coming back with the Oilers, which hurts a little bit to say it. But he will definitely be back in the NHL. His NHL career is not over. And Calvin Pickard's is just starting. And now I think that maybe we have to entertain the question of whether or not Calvin Pickard's NHL career should have started like as a full-time NHLer, you know, quite a while ago. Because he definitely has not at any point looked like an AHL guy who just got called up, you know, and he's just here, you know, to kill a little bit of time in the league until the guy that is down in the AHL, you know, conditioning himself for a return is ready to come back. No, actually, I think that I would go so far as to say that Calvin Pickard has looked an awful lot like Aiden Hill, you know, for the accursed Vegas Golden Knights. You know, last year during that Western Conference semifinal, you know, against the Edmonton Oilers, we know this well. Laurent Brossoit got injured, and so then they bring in this Aiden Hill guy. Nobody's heard of Aiden Hill. So we kind of think to ourselves, oh, this series is going to be a cakewalk now. Like, we should win this on goaltending alone. And as much as it hurts me to recount this, we did not. We did not win that series at all, let alone did we not just win it on the goaltending. Because as it turns out, Aiden Hill was ready for the NHL, and Aiden Hill has been really good. And now it looks like that's been the case with Calvin Pickard, which I think for a lot of the fan base has got to be a very frustrating situation. Because there are a lot of fans out there, arguably, actually myself included, if it was up to me, we wouldn't have signed Jack Campbell. Not because I don't think that he's a good goaltender, but because I have always looked at Stuart for several years now, maybe before anybody else that I can think of. I looked at Stuart Skinner as the Edmonton Oilers' starting goaltender of the future, and it just so happens, as it relates to that, the future is now. And I don't think that it should have taken Jack Campbell to have that early season, just catastrophic collapse. I don't think it should have taken that for us to realize that. I think that we should have known that before he ever got signed. I think that really we should have been looking at a goaltender to come in and help Stuart Skinner, get ready to take over and run as the starter full time, not a guy on a 5-year contract at, $5 million per year. Really, they should have brought in a guy for 1 year, and had him be the guy that just basically, shows Stuart Skinner the way until he kind of takes over. But as it turns out, maybe we didn't even necessarily need that because we had Calvin Pickard down in the minors all along. And I think it is actually safe to say that, a player doesn't just, suddenly wake up one morning and say to himself, I am an NHL-ready goaltender today, first day ever, at the age of 30-some years, as Calvin Pickard happens to be. He is an older guy. He's an older player. I think that Calvin Pickard probably could have made his debut in the NHL as a full-time player like he is now. Probably could have done that a couple of years ago. And so with that in mind, I think that you could actually make the argument that the reason why the Edmonton Oilers were in the situation they were in this past week, where they went to the trade deadline with $5 million in cap space wrapped up in Jack Campbell, and so unable to be used to help the team unless they could find a trade partner for Jack Campbell, which at this time they did not. But $5 million in cap space tied up in an AHL goaltender who is every bit as capable of playing in the NHL as we thought he was on the day that we signed him. $5 million in cap space wrapped up in that player instead of being able to be used to improve this team for the playoff run, to which, at this particular juncture, I think we've talked about it, this has to be the year. Like, this year definitely should be a Stanley Cup or bust kind of year. $5 million in cap space wrapped up in this player can't be used to help the team. I think that we're probably not in that situation if this managerial staff and coaching staff had found it in themselves a couple of years ago to have this level of faith in Calvin Pickard, to have the appropriate level of faith in Calvin Pickard and in Stuart Skinner. The Edmonton Oilers, I feel, created this situation for themselves by not understanding and appreciating what they already had in the hand when they went to the bush during free agency. And it does worry me a little bit to say that maybe in the case of Olivier Rodrigue, I feel like an idiot now. I should know how to pronounce this guy's name. That's on me. But anyhow, Olivier Rodrigue, that's how I'm going to say it. If that's wrong, then I apologize. But Olivier Rodrigue could be another NHL ready goaltender. If not now, then maybe next year. And maybe we're going to create another situation similar to this Jack Campbell situation by not appreciating what we have in that player and giving him an opportunity at the right time. That's kind of a very unwelcome frustration to have with a team, during a season where, you know what, we are still in a position where we could still go all the way. Like, that's a very real possibility. This team is a top contender for the Stanley Cup. When you play Boston twice, beat them once, get points out of all your games against Boston, you're in a pretty damn good place, to contend for the Stanley Cup. At this particular era of the National Hockey League. So make no mistake about it. Like, this team is contending right now. There's a very good chance that they might be raising the Stanley Cup at by the end of June. Don't count on it, but they have a shot. And if they had that $5 million to play with at the trade deadline this year, what sort of player could they have added to make that shot even stronger? Is that the kind of money that might have allowed us to bring in Jake Wenzel out of Pittsburgh? Or if we wanted to bring in a couple more players, maybe we could have brought in Anthony Duclair out of San Jose. I have been bullish on Anthony Duclair for his entire career. The Edmonton Oilers have had numerous opportunities to bring him in on the cheap, and they've never done it, and I've never really understood why. But you know what? That's just another possibility. And if we had known to roll the dice on Calvin Pickard a couple of years ago, that's what we could have been looking at right now. And so I feel like at the end of this particular year, if the Edmonton Oilers do in fact not win the Stanley Cup, and of course there's no guarantees, no matter how strong your shot is, there is never a guarantee that you will win the Stanley Cup. If they don't, I think a lot of us are going to be asking questions about, like, where did we come up short? And right now, my opinion is, my theory is, that's exactly where we came up short. Where instead of having the appropriate amount of faith in Stuart Skinner, and in particular in Calvin Pickard, instead of having that amount of faith, we went out and spent $25 million on a goaltender, $5 million per year on a goaltender that is now going to spend the rest of this season in the AHL. And that cap space is expended on an AHL goaltender for the rest of this season. I think if that turns out to be the case, I think that's the mistake that was made. And I hope that is not the case, of course. But if it is, there's my answer, and I don't necessarily foresee that answer changing.